To today's video. Today is Tuesday, August 19th, 2025, and today we're going to be talking about the New York City mayoral election and Andrew Cuomo, who's running for mayor of New York City, who's seeking an endorsement or a bump, not directly an endorsement, but from President Trump and the Republicans across the state and across the country as they look to the general election season of the New York City mayoral race. Now, Andrew Cuomo, who has publicly denied speaking to Donald Trump despite leaks and reporting that he might have spoken with the President of the United States about the mayoral election and also seems to have shied away from outright asking for a Trump endorsement, is very open to the idea of Donald Trump and the Republicans across the country making a comment on the race, making an argument that Mamdani must be stopped. And by nature, he expects that with the push comes to shove, that voters on the Republican side opt in for Cuomo rather than jshooa, who is the Republican nominee for mayor in New York City running in this election. Andrew Cuomo is counting on what Politico dubs a Trump bump, which Donald Trump has already publicly floated the idea that he might make an endorsement in the mayoral election. He's not a big fan, and any of these candidates that have been running here hasn't even endorsed the Republican nominee for mayor in the city, but very obviously, he's not happy with the situation of this race. There's nobody that Donald Trump likes, but Andrew Cuomo truly seems to believe that Donald Trump's influence on the race would only serve to help him in the inevitable general election. And this speaks to a broader problem with Cuomo going into the general election, that it isn't Democrats that Cuomo believes will carry him across the finish line. It's everybody else besides Democrats in New York City. But based on the electoral composition of the city, after all, Democrats outnumber Republicans by a margin of 6-1, it's extraordinarily difficult to see how Cuomo has a pathway to victory, especially as someone who hasn't been nominated by a major political party. He's up against the Democratic nominee for mayor, Zohran Mamdani. He's up against the incumbent independent mayor, Eric Adams. He's up against Curtis Sliwa, the Republican nominee for mayor. Cuomo is not in a great position, and he knows that. He's hoping that by the end of the campaign season, if Donald Trump does in fact make a call on this race, decides to endorse somebody, or decides to put out a statement saying that Mamdani must be stopped by any means necessary, you're going to find that it is Cuomo who believes that he gets the bump. But in reality, it probably doesn't work out that way, because there is a flawed sense of logic here that's coming from the Cuomo campaign around any involvement from the President of the United States. Because even if Donald Trump does tell voters in New York City to vote for Cuomo, it would arguably boost Democratic turnout for Mamdani tremendously more if Donald Trump had any type of impact on this race. Not to mention, Donald Trump hates Andrew Cuomo. They have a very rocky relationship, and as much as Andrew Cuomo seems to try to say that they've talked before and they've worked before, it doesn't make sense, because everybody knows exactly how Cuomo went on the oppositional edge against Trump in the 2020 election season, and how he did so amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Cuomo had been setting himself up for a hypothetical presidential bid or some type of national pushback against Donald Trump and his allies, and very obviously, Donald Trump took note and decided that he was very anti-Andrew Cuomo from nearly the very beginning. And it was only reaffirmed during the pandemic, this hatred between the two. And so this idea that Donald Trump somehow is going to be this Hail Mary or saving grace for Cuomo in this race isn't even rooted in any type of logic, because any type of impact that would benefit Cuomo from Trump would tremendously benefit Mamdani even more by just riling up the Democratic base. Because as much as there are some disaffected Democrats, looking at that primary, it was in fact a contested primary, and there are some Democratic voters that say they are backing Cuomo in the general election. But Donald Trump's influence on the race would only make them less likely to vote for Cuomo, and not any more likely. And thinking about the Republican primary here, Curtis Sliwa ran for New York City mayor largely unopposed. There wasn't any major opposition, and even though it seemed like the Democratic primary was shaking up to be something that was more interesting, the Republican primary was left untouched. Sliwa has been in New York City mayoral politics for quite some time. He actually was the Republican nominee for mayor in 2021. And so he made a return and a debut again in 2025, deciding that he was going to run in this race. But there was no MAGA candidate. There was no mainstream, Republican running in this race. This was a mayoral race. The Republicans knew they weren't going to win. And the MAGA base simply had no interest in being involved in. And I really don't believe that they are more inclined to vote for Cuomo, who many of them associate with the lockdowns of the COVID-19 pandemic, with X, Y, and Z, and even if it was the right decision at the time. No one is really arguing against Cuomo on the Democratic front. The main idea here is how will the voters take it? And chances are, if they're listening to Donald Trump and don't believe that Cuomo made the right decisions surrounding the pandemic, chances are they're not voting for him in this mayoral election. And New York City is one of the cities that was hit tremendously hard with COVID-19. This was and is the largest city in the entire nation. 8 million people across the state, a larger population than 38 states across this country. You look at that and you look at the numbers and you tell me that, you're in a position where Cuomo, is going to be regarded as popular amongst all these voters, especially given, we all know he left and retired under very, very bad situations and circumstances. Numerous sexual harassment allegations had come forth before the governor's office to a point that he simply couldn't survive it. And now he's returning to run for mayor. And again, we've been talking about how Cuomo has tried a variety of different pathways to try to become mayor. We've seen that he's gone so far as to asking other candidates to drop out of the race. He has gone to the Republicans and said, you need to drop out because if you believe Mamdani's a threat, I'm the only one who can beat him. Well, guess what? You couldn't beat him in a primary, so that argument doesn't play. Voters aren't going to be inclined to believe this narrative or even parties or candidates are not going to be inclined to believe this narrative that Cuomo is somehow this, this savior for the opposition to Mamdani if he couldn't even do it in the primary. And Cuomo is arguably coming up against a lot of candidates with a very big ego, right? Eric Adams has probably one of the biggest egos we've seen in American politics in recent memory, especially so far that he's switching political parties to be an independent to run for mayor because he knows he'd lose, but somehow believes he'll win the general election. A lot of mental gymnastics to get to that point. Don't get me wrong, but you're also looking at it from the lens of, Adams truly does seem to believe that he can do it. And even if he doesn't believe that he's going to be the one to do it, he certainly doesn't seem to be too inclined to endorse Andrew Cuomo or anyone else in this race, should he even decide to depart the race, because he doesn't have a great relationship, arguably, with anyone. And so now thinking about what this general election will likely look like, I don't think much is going to change it. The numbers are moving against Andrew Cuomo in quite a tremendous way. The polling data has suggested that as it has gotten closer and closer to the election, the opposition to Mamdani has shrunk and the support for him has grown. And it's made it more difficult for Republicans, Cuomo, Adams to oppose him because the voters are starting to look at it as this of a lens of Democrats versus everybody. That Cuomo and Adams and Sliwa all represent a different version of the city of New York that a lot of these voters just simply aren't on board for. And they're on board for it with the Democratic ticket, especially in the opposition and in the day and age of opposition, direct opposition to Donald Trump and his Oval Office. Because the more and more that people see that Cuomo is trying to cozy up to Trump, or not even necessarily cozy up, because I don't think that does it fairly, but I do think it says something, that there is an expectation that any type of influence from Donald Trump on this race would benefit Andrew Cuomo, I don't think is grounded in reality. And the numbers, like I said, have gotten better. The political betting markets, I don't like to use these much to take a look at it, but they do provide another source of looking at elections, and I do think they show that the trend lines here are pretty clear. The voters have moved in a direction that is more positive for Mamdani than not. The voters have moved in a direction that have put him in a position where in this general election, Mamdani has gotten closer to winning today than at any point in time during this election. And so thinking about where you'll be in 3 months' time, if it's only on an uphill climb, it's getting better. I mean, the fact remains Andrew Cuomo has about, 1 to 10 odds on winning this entire thing. Mamdani is at 83%, and I honestly think that is undercutting the amount of support that he has because the data was wrong in the primary election, severely underestimated him, and I do think that they are severely underestimating him again in the general election. Andrew Cuomo's time in New York politics is coming to a close, and time again, he's looking for something to save him. Whether it's other candidates dropping out, whether it's winning that primary outright, which he couldn't do, whether it's receiving an endorsement from Donald Trump or an indirect endorsement from Donald Trump. There's a variety of different ways that Cuomo looks to this race and says, I still have it in me. But you don't. It's over. Lost the governorship because of the misconduct. And now looking at the New York City mayoral election, it was never really his to begin with. He started out as the frontrunner, don't get me wrong. And I imagine that if he was this Democratic nominee, I don't think there'd be as much of a conversation around all these third-party candidates. And I do think that, believe it or not, a lot of Democrats would have fallen in line and endorsed him to a higher degree than what we are seeing today. And that's because Mamdani, for all purposes, and still today, is an outsider. He's not the mainstream of the Democratic Party, and he's not the candidate that a lot of the establishment Democrats wanted in this race. Endorsement after endorsement out of endorsement, besides cross-endorsements from other candidates in the race, the majority of them were going to Andrew Cuomo or other candidates, and not to Zohran Mamdani. But the voters chose, and they want Mamdani to be not only the Democratic nominee, but very clearly they want him to be the mayor. They want him to win this general election. They see him doing well against everybody else, and it doesn't put really anyone in a good position besides Mamdani in this November's race. So as we track it and as we watch it, it starts to explain more and more why Andrew Cuomo is looking at anything to help save him in the mayoral race, because arguably there's not much left for him. And now he's seeking help from the man who holds the highest office in the world, a Republican, and a person who Andrew Cuomo has railed tirelessly against. He's looking for, again, what Politico dubs the Trump bump. And it will be fascinating to see if this even comes true, because obviously Cuomo knows he's on track to lose and is really looking for anything to get him across the finish line, but that ended just 2 months ago. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.